Abhijeeth. Welcome to Ithihasa, India History Podcast, to the season Vijayanagara and episode 62. We meet again after the last episode, which I thoroughly enjoyed conversing with you. So, in this episode, as discussed, previously, we are going to touch on the legacy of Vijayanagara. Right. So, I'll come straight to the point and quickly want to pick your brain on. I want to kind of understand from your perspective, what does Vijayanagara mean to you? You have written all these books, wonderful fiction novels. I'm guessing it captured you so much, Vijayanagara and its story and all the drama and intrigues, that it kind of moved you to write all these novels. So I'm guessing probably it might be safe to assume that you do have some strong opinions about what Vijayanagara means to you. What do you think its legacy is? If you could, for our listeners, briefly, if you could start off on it, and then we can take it from there.
Sure. Thank you so much, and it's great to be back. So with Vijayanagara, right? I think Vijayanagara for me is a very interesting and probably a very inspiring tale. So even when I was very young, we had this small books and everything about Vijayanagara that we used to read and everything. But you never realize the scale, the grandeur, the scope of the place till you visit Hampi. And when you visit Hampi, you are just spellbound by just how magnificent even the ruins is. Imagine how it was when it was in its heydays. So, just going into Hampi will kind of take you back in time. And for me, I think I visited Hampi first, I think in my school days, probably when I was in my middle grade or something. And then I probably visited. At that time, I didn't really realize the importance. I could see that this is all very beautiful and everything, but I think it was only while in my engineering and then probably later once I started working when I went there, then I could see the scale, the grandeur, and what it was and what it might have meant for the people of that time. So it was a statement. So if you see the history of that time, you will realize that Vijayanagara was probably one of the last remaining large empires of South India. It was a empire that transitioned from the period of all the Hoysalas, Yadavas, Kakatayas, and everything, and then to just Vijayanagara because everything else was gone. So it is kind of, for me, it was like this amazing period where everything was transitioning and there was this empire that just comes up and then just slows down this transition from, say, early medieval to more to the time of the Marathas, I would call as pre-industrial. So there is this empire that comes and then it allows to maintain whatever cultural legacies and uh, temples and everything. It kind of maintains it, it retains it, it builds bigger things. So for me, that is, I think it's its greatest legacy, which it has left all over the South India. Actually, if you just go at a lot of places, even as far as, say, coastal Karnataka, where you'll find a lot of Jain basadis being built during the time of Vijayanagara by the uh, Nayakas or the subordinate kings of Vijayanagara. So it was a period where the old beliefs or the old value system was still being protected and encouraged. At the same time, there was changes also that was happening, and the empire was a very dynamic place wherein they are accepting values, but at the same time sticking hard to their own core culture and tradition. So I think that is what I think is the legacy of Vijayanagara, which is a retention of our own culture and legacy. I would
Understood.
like to hear what you
Yes,
feel.
yes, absolutely. So before I go off, I would like to take you back on what you said earlier about when you visited Hampi. You said you were like completely amazed and mesmerized that someone that if I have to like paraphrase you, you said you have to visit Hampi to understand the scale and the magnificence of Vijayanagara. As someone who has never been to Hampi, but as someone who has poured over a lot of pictures of the ruins and all. Just looking at the pictures and all, I kind of, or the plans, right? I get goosebumps. So I can totally imagine how impactful it would have been on you, because you were there personally. You were breathing the air. You were walking the same steps which probably a lot of rayas and generals and all of these august figures have walked through, right?
Yep.
Or the Hampi Bazaar or the
The-
Mahanami Tibba.
With Tibba, yeah.
Yeah. So, what was one of the most, I should say, impactful monuments or the ruins that actually literally moved you? I would really love to hear about it, because that would also, not only from an architectural standpoint, but I would like to kind of understand what is it actually, it really, struck you.
I think, like you rightly mentioned, the Mahanami Dibba, the Virupaksha temple, the elephant stables, and everything. You can see the scale and the grandeur, but at the same time, you can see the destruction. So, which means that it's a, for you as a viewer, it's a very bittersweet moment wherein you can see this grandeur, but at the same time, it is a lot of demolition that has happened. So for me, those places like the Mahanami Dibba, that, like, till you climb there, you realize, you try to figure out how these people would have watched this. The Mahanami Dibba was where they used to have this uh, annual celebration wherein
Dashara.
there'll be some dancing and everything would happen.
Right.
So you try to figure out where, how did it they do it, what was the purpose of this. Same thing with all the temples, the mahals, and everything, right? And most importantly, you, as you go through this, you realize that there is no palace, like there are no palaces per se. So you try to figure out, okay, where are the palaces? So it automatically makes you start thinking about, okay, how did these people live? So I mean, it's not just one place. Every place you go through, right, you can see these huge granite towers that is standing there to protect the city. And anywhere you go, you get just spellbound by seeing something or the other. And it's not just me, a lot of people feel that. And even the archaeologists keep finding new places and new things surrounding the Hampi region, where they find some I think architecture or something which they would have assumed that this probably served this purpose, but then they realize that, oh no, that is not, it needs something else. So just everything feels extremely important, at least, if you
Right.
want to call that. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. Yes, as someone who's been studying Hampi, I should say remotely, through archives, through books, through photographs, there is a deep sense of pain too that goes along with the amazement, right? It is amazing that almost 99.99% of it has been destroyed, but the 0.0001% that is still there, it doesn't fail to amaze us.
Yep.
And when you go back to the chronicles of Fernão Nunes or Abdul Razak and all these people, these European, Russian, Middle Eastern travelers and chroniclers, the kind of grandeur and the grand scale that they describe, right? I think it is really difficult for us to even imagine.
Yep.
Because there are not many modern cities, probably apart from Rome in Italy, that can even rival what the descriptions about Vijayanagara, right,
Yep.
are.
Yep.
So yes, so coming back to the question of what does Vijayanagara mean to me, I think to me personally, Vijayanagara means so much in the sense that it has helped preserve my identity, or our identity right now. The fact that we can call ourselves Hindus, right? Or most Hindus, if in South India at least, if they can call themselves as Hindus, practicing their religion or Sanatana Dharma, and we are able to follow our rituals, practices, religions, whatever it might be that we hold dear. It was all a gift of Vijayanagara. And I think that, to me, is the pinnacle of its legacy. The fact that even after, I should say, 500 years or 600 years, right, that we are still talking about it. And it can be either through, in the sense, in a happy sense, in a prideful manner, or as something that we are kind of embracing as part of our heritage. I don't see any other kingdom or empire in India that kind of helps you connect, other than the Marathas. And that too, most of the time, even the fact that we kind of owe to Marathas too is mostly, most of us, right? When Marathas come to our mind, it is usually, the face of it is Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Right, but here the difference here is Vijayanagara does not need a face, though we though most of us do relate Krishnadevaraya to Vijayanagara, right? But what I'm trying to say is Vijayanagara as an idea can exist on its own without even the face of Krishnadevaraya being attached. I mean, I like how you cannot separate the Marathas and Shivaji Maharaj, the Marathas from the face of this legend, Shivaji. Like that, the idea of Vijayanagara, though, is more like you can separate it. It can stand on its own.
Yes, and also, I think just a small point there.
Sure.
So Vijayanagara probably is unique in the lot of empires in India, in the sense that if you see most of the kingdoms or empires, they're always associated with the individual ruling family. Say the Cholas. The Chola Empire was associated with the Chola royal family. So once the Chola royal family is gone, the Chola Empire is gone. The empire didn't have an existence outside the royal family. Vijayanagara, this is the same thing you'll find in most of the dynasties of India. Vijayanagara was unique in the sense like it was ruled by not one but four different families, and they were not, at least they didn't start out related to each other. These are not interrelated families, rather these were the Sangamas, the Saluvas who came in. So all of them took in the same Vijayanagara identity. They called themselves the kings of Vijayanagara. So they
Right.
didn't call themselves the Saluva kings or the Tuluva kings or the Aravidu kings. No, they themselves understood the identity, that their identity was the rulers of Vijayanagara, or they belonged to Vijayanagara. So Vijayanagara as an identity existed even beyond Krishnadevaraya or any of the individual kings, because the kings themselves called them, like, try to associate it with Vijayanagara. They didn't try to start something completely on their own.
That's a great point, because even the emperors themselves, irrespective of which dynasty they belong to, but starting with Sangama, starting with Harihara, they started signing the documents, the official state-related documents, with the seal of, I think, Pashupati, right?
Shri Virupaksha.
Sri Virupaksha.
Yeah.
That itself, when I learned that, I was blown away by it.
Yeah.
Right? Here you have such illustrious rulers, right, who might have some egotistic or megalomaniac streak in them. As emperors, some as leaders, as even politicians nowadays have more, probably, right? So in spite of that, they strongly decided that they were just acting as agents of Virupaksha.
Yep.
Right? And that they always signed all the official documents with that official seal.
Yep.
So, which kind of, ties back again into what you've been saying. So, people wouldn't, these emperors and dynasty, all the heirs of all these dynasties who have been succeeding, they wouldn't do that if they didn't believe in a much higher ideal or an idea.
Yeah, because you're right, because it is almost equivalent to the Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire, because the Byzantine Empire had an identity beyond its emperors, or Roman Empire had an identity beyond its emperors, because Roman
Right.
Empire was ruled by multiple families, and they all believed in the Roman Empire. So when you call as an empire, it's a Roman Empire. Similarly,
Yes.
Vijayanagara is not associated with the family; it's associated with that empire, and every
Yes.
family served that empire. So it's actually very interesting, right? So I personally feel if Ramaraya hadn't lost and then the transition happened to Aravidu, and if the empire had continued, probably in 100 years, Aravidu dynasty would have given way to another dynasty that would have come in and continued to rule Vijayanagara. So the empire would have continued, but ruled by different dynasties, because there was a precedence. So
Yes.
a lot of the empires never had that precedence. So once you have somebody like the Rashtrakutas or the Chalukyas, once they are gone, their empire is gone. The
Right.
next dynasty who comes in, they don't call themselves as Chalukyas; they take a separate name. So
Yes.
Vijayanagara was unique in the sense, like the dynasties came in, they called themselves as emperors of Vijayanagara. And like you mentioned in the previous discussion, the previous episode, how Chandragiri was also called as Vijayanagara, or Vellore was renamed as Vijayanagara. So which means that
Penukonda.
though
Yes.
Penukonda, sorry, my bad.
Yes.
Penukonda was named
Yes.
as Vijayanagara. So which means that the emperors understood the importance of the name Vijayanagara, and
Yes.
Vijayanagara, the name and the was to the capital, and the empire itself was separate from their individual
Yes.
uh,
Absolutely. Yeah, it was
dynasties.
kind of synonymous. Of course, in the documents, if you see, yeah, they used to refer it as Vijayanagara, but of course, it was a Karnataka Samrajya or Karnataka Samrajya, right?
Yeah, that's the
But
name of the
yes,
empire.
I tried. But the fact that, with the Vijayanagara became synonymous with the empire, I remember on YouTube, on one of the videos, one of the podcasts, one of the Kannada, someone from Karnataka had mentioned, "Sir, you haven't said Karnataka Samrajya. You've only been saying Vijayanagara. Vijayanagara is only the city." So I said, you're right. But then there is also this other side, which is Vijayanagara had become such a big idea
Yep,
that it was much bigger than Karnataka Samrajya.
that's right.
Right,
So yeah,
and it has become synonymous, and we ourselves, are so used to saying it as Vijayanagara. But yeah, I'm not to be pedantic, right?
no,
When
that
some,
is
yeah,
fine, because
right,
I think at least from my understanding and my research, right, what happened was the Karnataka that we think as Karnataka or Kannadigas or whatever we have, right? That's a very local. I mean, it's not a local person, but then it's an identification that only people who speak Kannada do. But if you go back in time, Karnataka and the Karnataka Empire or something was like, I think for Vijayanagara at least, they started identifying themselves as the Karnataka Empire because they were trying to mold themselves after successful empires like the Chalukyas, Rashtrakutas, and all, who all ruled over that region. So they were trying to portray themselves as the descendants of this successful empire. So which is why it became Karnataka Empire. And over a period of time, what happened is, because these dynasties identified themselves with Vijayanagara, like even Aravidus called themselves as Karnatas. We know
right,
that they are not Karnatas
right.
because they were from the coastal Andhra
Yes,
regions.
there
We
are
know
more
that they were.
Telugus than Cannaris. Yes,
Yes, but then the thing is, they considered themselves as
yes,
Karnatakas or Kannadas or whatever, because
yeah.
the name Karnataka kind of moved out of its geographical limitation and it became identified with the entire empire. And which is
That
why
is
you have this bizarre naming of Carnatic Wars that happens in Tamil Nadu. The
right,
British called it as the Carnatic Wars, but it happens in Tamil Nadu. The reason why it's called as Carnatic Wars is because the British got the name Carnatic or Karnata. That's what they initially
yes,
assumed, was that entire South India was called as Karnata after Vijayanagara Empire.
right.
So
I think that's a beautiful point about bringing that Carnatic Wars thing by the British. Yeah, I loved
yeah,
it. Yeah,
yeah. So people don't realize that, right? So that identification with Karnataka or Karnataka had kind of moved out of the normal geographical or the linguistic identities. It kind of became a pan South India identity, at least for the
Yes.
kings of Vijayanagara. I mean, obviously. So when uh, Tirumala Raya goes and re-establishes the Vijayanagara in uh, Chandragiri, he calls, or sorry, Penukunda, he calls himself as reviver of the Karnataka Samrajya.
Yes. Yes.
And most of the Nayakas who are under him are all Telugu speaking Nayakas, but then they all consider themselves as Karnata or Karnataka.
Yes.
So their linguistic identity and their uh, identity with respect to what you call the Karnataka Samrajya is we need to look at from a, like, the problem is we are looking at from our perspective, which is
Yes.
the modern identical
Modern identity.
Yes,
Yes.
but they had a different identity. So this
Yes.
would be, I think this is like people in France calling the ancient people who lived in France as French,
Right.
because they are not French. They were whatever they were Celts or whatever. So similarly, the modern Kannadigas and Telugus, we need to accept that Vijayanagara had an identity. So all the
Absolutely.
people who lived there called themselves as Karnatakas or
Yes.
Karnatas.
This is again, again that I think it takes you back to the same thing. See, it was an idea that transcended dynasties, generations, time, geographies, languages, cultures. Right. The only parallel you see is where people, even who didn't reside in Rome or anywhere near Rome or Italy, calling themselves as citizens of Rome, of Roma, right?
The Holy
Even
Roman Empire.
yeah, or even during the Roman Empire itself, right? Its borders had stretched, to such a large extent, where even in people in subjects in Judea too, they used to proudly call themselves, some of them, right, who at least and loved the idea of a Roman citizenship. They were proud to call themselves as citizens of Roma, right?
Yes, and I think that is also what probably happened with Vijayanagara, because most of these Nayakas, right, like Aravidu dynasty, they probably did not have the same pedigree, royal pedigree, as you call it.
Right.
So they were probably farmers, or their ancestors were that. So which means that there was a social mobility, and once you are moving up, you still need to get accepted by the rest of the nobility. So which meant that they had to portray themselves as belonging to something important, and Vijayanagara made it easier for them because there was a identity, which is the Karnataka Samrajya identity, which is what they all adopted, saying that we all belong to this empire. And then, which means that as a noble in the empire, they felt that they had the right to rule the empire.
Right.
So that was pretty normal according to the Aravidu dynasty or even Tuluva dynasty or Saluva. I think the Saluva dynasty, at least from a lot of historians, it does seem that the Saluvas were descendant from the Saluvas of Hadavalli, which is close to Jarsoppa. The Tuluvas are a much more trickier thing. So it's very difficult for us to figure out who is who, because what happens is after one point of time, these dynasties start assuming identities of some ancient, like how Ramaraya assumes identity that he descended from the Chalukyas of Kalyani.
Kalyani Chalukyas. Yes,
Yes,
yes. And his fascination and obsession with Kalyani.
yes.
Yes,
I
yes.
think the reason why he does that is because the Kalyani Chalukyas were the last Karnataka's empire. So
Right.
by saying that I am descendant from these guys, he is trying to tie his lineage to the Chalukyas of Kalyani, then from them to the Rashtrakutas, and finally to the Chalukyas of Badami, who were the original Karnataka Samrajya or Karnataka Samrajya, who
Right.
were the ones who brought that fame and name to that particular name.
Yes, yes, yes. Or Kadambas, which have been, going because the initial, during the first Sangama dynasty, the first few rulers, of course, the empire was a fledgling infant which had to protect itself from the aggression from the north
And South.
Right, of course, and south from the Madurai Sultanate, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, but of course. So during that time, you would see that the focus is mostly on the defense and consolidation and setting up the basic administration structures, right? In the kingdom, uh, versus focus on art or architecture. But having said that, there's still some architecture monuments that were built, temples that were built, but most of them were, I think, like you said, um, used to reek of heavy influence from either the Chalukyan or Kadamban um,
Hoysala.
architectural styles. Yes, yes.
Hoysala probably, because Hoysala were their predecessors.
Hoysalas too. Yes, even that, of course. Yes, all these three other previous kingdoms, they had a lot of that influence where they embraced it. Of course, they had to they it's like even if you wanted to, you cannot put in radically something new. You have to take the people along the culture. Um, it's like if you go slow, the progress is actually, or the change is faster. The slower the change, the faster you can actually achieve things.
Yes.
Too right. Yeah,
But then,
we
but then
digress, but yeah,
Vijayanagara, sorry, yeah, Vijayanagara actually expanded pretty fast. If you look at all the empires of South India,
right.
I think this is a good time for us to start discussing about what was it with
Before,
just when the Vijayanagara came into being. So we can just discuss the political environment.
absolutely. I think a year before Vijayanagara, right? Even before I think to understand the how Vijayanagara came into being, we need to literally go back a bit to the Hoysalas. Especially the most fascinating character is the most crucial character, I would say, is Veeraballala. There were I talk about this in the Four Kingdoms, the Foundation mini series, and the Four Kingdoms, the Yadavas, Pandyas, Hoysalas. Then of course, Cholas they were dying breed by then, right?
Kakatiyas.
And the Kakatiyas, right? But the major powers were these four, and they had a lot of tensions in between them. Of course, in between there came a small comet-like kingdom, Kampili. It kind of was there for probably 25, 30 years. It punched way above its weight, but even it's was a very tragic story. I would say kind of more of a very hero's arc, but it's a tragic hero's arc. I would say Kampila story, if you see.
Yep.
So during this time, the south was mostly shielded from the north,
Right.
or from, I should say, the Islamic sultanates up in the north, which had already caused a lot of mayhem, and they consolidated, and after successfully they had broken through northwest and established themselves firmly in the north.
Yep.
Right, but their attention never turned to the south because there was some barriers in the Deccan, huge barriers and geographical barriers separating the north from the south in the form of Deccan.
Yep.
It was very harsh region. Geographically, it's very vast. Nobody knew how to navigate it or cross through it, leave alone normally cross through it, but even through armies. Of course, there was people going from south and north because after all, India was the whole subcontinent was ruled by many empires before too. But so it was the first foray into south was by Alauddin Khilji.
Yep.
He was the one who wanted to establish his own influence, and for that he needed a lot of money and wealth. So his uncle was the ruling sultan, and he didn't want to be under his thumb. And that's when he takes a daring initiative, risk, by sending a lot of probing forces into the south.
Yep.
I think that's where the real story begins. and I think this is where I also probably you would also you would be a good it would be a good point to pass the ball to you, in the sense that trying to understand the why did Khilji succeed in a military perspective, right? Breaching the southern defenses, right? After beginning with, of course, Yadavas and Kakatiyas, right? What was um, the defining military advantage that the Khiljis or the Islamic forces up north, right? And then, of course, these all were like all these invaders were coming from across Afghanistan and all of it, or from up, central what do you say, Central Asia, right? So I know you have studied this military aspect quite a lot than me, and you've always shown interest
Yep.
to talk about that too. So I guess before we continue the story, let's touch a bit on that.
Right. Okay. So I think for this we need to go a little bit far away from India. Actually, quite a bit far away
Right.
to India, to a place called Mongolia, where Genghis Khan is basically expanding, or rather creating his Mongol empire. So what happens is, the Genghis Khan is attacking the Mongol empire. So he was expanding all throughout, and then as he moved on, a lot of these uh, tribal people, right? So Kipchaks, Kumans, these are all the people who were his opponents initially, at least. So once these were defeated, these guys were captured and then they were sold as slaves. A lot of them. So Genghis Khan is expanding, he's capturing a lot of Kipchaks, he's killing a lot of people. At the same time, he's capturing all of these steppe nomad kids, mainly very young people, because they are the ones who are sold as slaves. The older people were just killed. Anyways, women and children mainly. Now, while this is happening, you need to understand there is a second aspect to it, which is what happens is, the Abbasid Caliphate is there is a new kind of military institution which the Caliph creates, which is called as the Gulams. So what happens is, a lot of the armies of that time, they had this soldiers, which, like how the Indian Maula Bala, what we call as. But what these guys suddenly discovered, that these guys were not effective because they had their own loyalty. Because these guys were all tied to the same region, they had their own connections, they had family loyalties and everything. So they needed a separate force which wasn't actually tied to the local loyalty. So what these guys created was this Gulam system, which is they used to buy these kids, young people who are mostly, or actually rather, were always non-Muslims. These people were brought in, they were trained into becoming soldiers from a very young age, put into a very rigorous discipline. They were made to fight in formations and everything. So in effect, it was a standing army that was being created. So this
Standing army that was very effectively brainwashed.
yes,
Right. Makes
So
sense. Yeah.
yeah, so this Gulam system carries over to a lot of the Islamic republic. So for
Even
example,
Ottomans to Janissaries.
yes. So those come later. But
Right.
this Gulams, if you're talking about that, even the Muhammad of Ghor, when he attacks, right, his most elite soldiers were his Gulams, the Gulam cavalry, or Gulam, mainly cavalry actually.
Interesting.
So now this is where this Kipchak and Kuman thing comes in. Most of these people who were sold were actually bought by two different sultanates. One was the Delhi Sultanate, and the second was the Mamluk Sultanate. So Delhi Sultanate bought a lot of these young kids, trained them into be gulams. These were the actual, what do you call, the spearhead of the invasion. So when you said the Yadavas were invaded, right? All of the main invasion were led by these gulams. The gulams, who were all steppe riders, they were from very young age, they were trained to be riding in steppe. They were very good at archery. And on top of that, now, because of their training as
When you say
gulams,
archery, horse archery,
right, horse archery.
which Mongols were really experts at.
Right. So all most of the step people were
Yes, step
experts in.
riders. Yes,
Yeah.
this is I'm
So
just kind of
explaining it to the
explaining
audience.
for
Yeah.
the listeners. Right. Yes.
Right. So what happens is the Khalji dynasty, all of these people, their gulams or their elite soldiers or the cavalry is all step riders. And these are the ones who spearhead this invasion. In fact, they are the reason why Alauddin Khilji is even able to defeat the Mongols. When the Mongols invade, uh, the Mongolian invasion of India, which is actually by grand Mongolian scheme, it was a very small affair, but still, Alauddin Khilji managed to defeat these Mongols because the Mongols and the Delhi Sultanate fight exactly same. They
Right.
have got steppe archers, heavily armored cavalry lancers, and these are the ones who are used to fight. So the invasion of South India, again, it's initially when Alauddin Khilji attacks, you need to see how the campaign, the way it works is he attacks the capital of Yadavas. He attacks exactly at the time when the successor, the Ramachandra Deva's son, is not in the capital. He's the
Yes.
outside, probably on an invasion of the Hoysala territory because the
Yes.
Hoysalas and the Yadavas have been constantly fighting.
Right.
So when he marches, he is not there. And when these guys attack, he tries to come back. He probably comes back with his cavalry, which, by the way, to a lot of listeners who think that cavalry was a very later invasion in later invention in South India, that's not the case. Because in South India, cavalry was already started being accepted as a primary arm in a lot of these states, especially the Hoysalas and even the Yadavas. So they had cavalry. The thing is, their cavalry was still lancers, but then they were mostly light or medium lancers. Probably some of them were
Light
armored.
cavalry. Yes.
Yes, there were some of them were armored, but not many of them. Compared to these guys who were lancers and horse archers. So and they had a greater discipline than that these guys didn't possess.
Right.
So that is what the reason why they lost this war.
Yes. For the
That and a
listeners.
very good
Yeah. Absolutely.
intelligence.
That's a great point. Because for the listeners, the what Abhijeeth is saying is that um, first of all, the other side, the Islamic forces cavalry, was much more disciplined, and most importantly, they were not only kind of heavy cavalry, but they were mostly um, experts in horse archery too. Now, this at that time was a game changer, right? Being able to shoot while the horse is galloping at your enemy cavalry or the infantry. This gave an amazing advantage in the sense that they could do some blistering fast hit and run attacks on you, which could cause heavy damage. It was like through pure attrition. By the time the other side, through their cavalry, tried to catch up with them, they would have already taken so much incoming fire from these horse archers that they would be bleeding, and the other side would run away. They'd come back, do this again and again. Now, when you imagine this, a cavalry force is doing this in a battle for hours together, like 15-20 times, you could imagine at the scale of damage, and the other side has to just give up or just retreat. So yes, Abhijit, please go ahead.
Yeah, that is, as you mentioned, is a very important point. But at the same time, people don't realize the discipline.
Yes.
So, if you look at the kingdoms of this time, right, they didn't really have what is called as a standing army. Even some of the larger kingdoms, like the Yadavas, who were probably the largest of the kingdoms, their standing army would have been pretty small, despite what we read in the books about hundreds of thousands of people and
Yes.
all, which is it's
Exaggeration.
just that, it's just poetic
Yes.
license. A regular king probably wouldn't have more than a few thousand people, and like ready-made soldiers that he could lay his hands on. And maybe if he was given time, he could probably get in a few, maybe 10,000 soldiers. When I say soldiers, these are actually people who knew how to fight. These were then padded up with levies, some kind of farmer. Well, I wouldn't say farmers, but levies basically. These were all people who were brought in to fight just for that campaign.
They were conscripted when
They were
needed.
conscripted.
Right.
Thank you. That was
Yes.
the word I was looking for.
Yes.
So the problem with that is, right, when you're pitting them against these trained and who have been trained for a very long time. Many of them were trained for 10, 15 years in their Ghulam institutions. It wasn't a battle because these guys had discipline, they had training against conscripts who just didn't have any of that. So obviously the battle was a very unequal battle. So that is why a lot of the battles, if you see the initial battles at least, they lost. So Yadavas, and also because they had a very good intelligence. So when these guys came in, they attacked exactly at the time when the main Yadava army was out of the capital. If that army was in the capital, I don't think so these guys could have sieged. I mean, despite what a lot of people try to make out about the cavalry archer based army, they weren't good at siege.
Yes.
The Mongols were extremely efficient in wars and everything was because they had this ability to adopt into new technologies. So they had a powerful siege engine. Cavalry archery wasn't a new invention. For Mongol, the reason why Mongols were such a great conquering empire was because they had this ability to adopt uh, things like siege engines and then a lot of heavy infantry as well. So they were able to have a mixed army rather than just cavalry based army. So,
Right.
but the invasion of Yadava territory, led by Alauddin Khilji himself, was a raiding force. It wasn't really an invasion, at least not
Right.
the initial one.
Yeah, it was something that actually couldn't lay an extended siege, right?
Yeah.
With extended supply lines and very thin food and water supplies, and also for listeners, right? The Devagiri fort back then, that was I think controlled by, which is now Daulatabad fort, was a massive citadel.
Yep.
It was a fortress. It was not something that actually could be taken so lightly by anyone, all right? And that's why I think what you're saying about, which is true, that the main force wasn't there. His son was in campaign of the south somewhere else, either in Hoysala or some other territory, right? And yes, please continue.
Yep. So we know how that played out, which is Ramachandra surrenders and then uh, the Khilji carries out with a lot of wealth. He uses that wealth to build up his base and then overthrow his uncle. But then that tells him a few things. One, there are very rich kingdoms in the south which can
Yes.
actually fuel his empire.
Yes.
So this is followed by the main thing, which is the invasion of Malik Kafur into South India.
Right.
Again, what is interesting is Malik Kafur seems to have extremely good intelligence because his attack on the Hoysalas happened exactly at the time when the Veeraballala is actually in Pandyan territory
Right.
and the main Hoysala army is not present at the capital of Dwarasamut.
Right.
So it was not just that they had a superior military; they also had superior intelligence.
Intelligence. Yes.
Yes. So from the Muslim chronicles, as I understand, they say that the Hoysalas just surrender. But then from the Hoysala records that we have, it does seem like there was a battle that was fought near
Yes.
the capital, and a
Yes.
couple of his generals die fighting the invaders, and then Veeraballala returns and he realizes that this is not a battle he's going to win.
Here's the interesting thing. You bring the point about the surrender and all, right? So Alauddin Khilji, as much as cruel he was, like it's depicted either in the chronicles or in the movies, but he had a very interesting policy when it came to the southern kingdoms. So he was very astute in realizing or understanding that it was really not sustainable for his army or for him to keep coming down, right, up from north in all these repeated sieges, or in repeated invasions. Because first of all, the capital is in Delhi, and the Deccan is a extremely hostile terrain. They're in a very new terrain, extended supply lines, which once the other kingdoms understand what's going on, they try to recover. They can do the hit and run, right? So Alauddin Khilji had kind of a tacit policy in the sense that as long as either the Yadavas or Hoysalas or Pandyas or Kakatiyas, as long as they just um, don't call themselves as a sovereign rulers, instead as accept his, what should I say, Khilji dynasties or
Overlordship.
empires, right, supremacy, right? He would just take the tribute and let them to their own wits. They can rule, administer their kingdoms however they want, as long as initially we will raid them, we'll take, then we'll have them submit to us, and then after that we will just enjoy the riches, be in Delhi, keep getting these annual tributes. That was his policy, actually. Not wholesale destruction of the kingdoms, because these all kingdoms were cash cows, and because they were not only rich in terms, for example, the was it the Yadavas who had the one of the richest diamond mines, right?
I think it was a Kakatiyas.
Kakatiyas, right? And I think, yes, similarly, Yadavas had something, Pandyas had something, because they used to control the coast and the lot of resources and trade that was happening. So Khilji understood that instead of killing the cow, metaphorically and figuratively, really too, it is better that take the initial pound of flesh from the cow, keep the cow alive, let it, it is beneficial for Khiljis to keep getting the cow milk regularly. So
Yep.
now, the point about Malik Kafur and all of this was to just get those kingdoms submit to him, so that he can put a hook, keep sucking them up.
Yep.
Right? But of course, these were not the kingdoms that would take it lying down. There, after all, they had some legacy, they had some prestige, right? And then you had these were all Hindu kingdoms, and South as such was fully shielded from all of these invasions that happened, that ravaged the north for a long time. So this for them was a shock, and of course it took them some time to recover. But even after, initially, I think Yadavas too rebelled.
Yep.
Right.
Ramachandra's son
Yes.
rebels. I forgot his name, but yeah,
Right.
he rebels. He's defeated, killed.
Yes.
Your point about Alauddin Khilji being a bit more, say, realistic is actually
Yes.
correct, because Alauddin Khilji pretty much realized that he just couldn't control these empires,
Yes.
which are so far away from his power base. I think that kind of craziness was probably something he did not really bargain for. But I
Right.
think the next king who came,
Tuglaqhs. Yes.
Muhammad bin Tughlaq,
Yes.
was that crazy. I
Yet
mean,
he was. Yes.
so there were I think Muhammad bin Tughlaq is this fascinating character. I'm not sure whether I would call him fascinating. I would just call him as a bit like a
He was a very eccentric character if you look at his policies and all.
yeah.
Like, for example,
That is putting it mildly, because now after
yes.
like say 8th centuries or something, we can look
Right.
look at his policies and call it as eccentric. But if you look at his actual policies, they were
Very
pretty
barbaric.
cruel
No,
and
I'm more talking, of course, more, almost I would say all of the Islamic invaders that had come in, they were to a large extent very cruel. Even Khiljis themselves were renowned for their cruelty. That, I think, it's a foregone conclusion. When I say eccentric about Tughlaq, these used to take all these rash, I would say, some of the logical decisions. Like overnight, he kind of moves the capital from Delhi to Dalatabad.
and
Tells
his
his
and his
tells his
brilliant reforms with respect to coinage and everything.
coinage, currency. Right, he, I think, tries to copy the Chinese in the paper currency, and it ends up being a total disaster where people
Yep.
are starting to mint their own coins and fool the Tughlaq revenue officers, and
I
he
think I
literally
think uh,
goes bankrupt.
I think we can have a fuzzy TV series set in that time.
Yeah. Yes. So that's, but yes. So I think the Tughlaqs are the ones who become, I would say, more greedy. That they want to actually go take the entire cow. We don't want Midas to stay alive. We will take the entire gold. Right. That's where they kind of deviate from the earlier Khiljis policies. Of course, the way Tughlaqs take over Khiljis, that in itself is a tale of extreme horror, and it's total palace intrigue, lot of blood is shed. But yeah, so Tughlaqs are the one who actually deviate from the policy, and they start becoming extremely aggressive in the south or in their campaigns, and they start to basically bit by bit try to conquer or invade into deep south, which actually sets off alarm bells, is what kind of happens.
Right. And they are very successful as well. If you
Yes,
look
they
at
are.
Tughlaq, right? So by the time Tughlaq invasion happens, Yadavas are gone because Alauddin Khilji would have crushed them.
Right.
The Kakatayas try to rebel under Prataparudra. Tughlaqs pretty much defeat them, force them, and then Prataparudra commits suicide as he is being led towards Delhi.
Yes.
Then an invasion of South happens, where the Hoysalas wisely refuse to fight. They just accept the overlordship and then just let them move on. And then the army marches south. I think there is an invasion of Pandya lands, and then the Pandyas are defeated. And this is where the Madurai Sultanate gets
Yes.
established, or
Yes.
rather, they establish a garrison there, which kind of morphs into the Madurai Sultanate later.
Yeah.
So,
The interesting thing though is that the Yadavas, to save their own necks, right, when they realize the kind of situation they are in, they lead them to Hoysala territory.
that was during the Malika first time. That's right.
Malikafur, right?
Yep.
And Hoysala, so Veeraballala III, right, there are a lot of narratives which say that he was a coward, he just gave up and all of this, right? But in reality, if you really look at it, you kind of study closely, connect the dots. If you look at Hoysala Vamsa, one of the important sources to, if you look at it, he, there's a literal translation for it. English translation is Veeraballala willingly takes up this political policy of cane reed. It's called, which is, like how a sugarcane reed bends before a huge gush of wind without breaking.
Yep.
Right? He embraces that policy with Khiljis and Tuglaqs. By that, what I mean is, sure, initially he tries to fight, and then, he realizes that he's outwitted, like how you said, right, through better intelligence and much faster movement of armies and all of it.
And his armies are rather were not as capable as the armies of the Deccans. I mean, that is something we need to accept.
Yes,
It's
yes,
a fact.
yes, it's a fact. No, absolutely. What I'm saying is that he decided to take this policy of bending before the whether they are Tughlaqs or Khiljis or both, temporarily to bide his time.
Yep.
Unfortunately, he does just like how the Yadavas lead Kafur into Hoysala territory to save, to get out of trouble. He also leads the army into Pandya territory too. And of course, they
Yep.
themselves, all of these had very, lot of intrigues between them. They kind of probably had a lot of deep animosity. These are all like towering figures, lot of huge egos, right? And they were craving for territories. So probably at that time, Veeraballala, thought, okay, if I try to fight here, I'm going to lose it all. So I don't have a choice. So let me just divert them to Pandyas. I might as well weaken them in the south while I save my own territory up north. Right. It kind of it did play into Veerabhallala's hands and also in the hands of Khiljis, of course,
Yep.
where they also got, the whole invasion of Pandyan territory is well documented, right? There was a civil war going on in between the brothers there,
Yep.
where but they do come together at a critical point where Kafur is completely coming in, taking down all these majestic and important religious centers, temples, but they do buy their time, buy them out. But then, of course, um, Pandyas don't survive too long after that too, right? As a force, but yeah, in the whole, when the entire battlefield you see up in flames, when all the chips have fallen, you will see that the only one standing, even after Kampili has fallen. Kampili was also kind of had their own this thing with Yadavas and Hoysalas. You would
Yeah, the Kampali's Nayakas, from what we understand, were originally feudatories of Yadavas,
right
and then they kind of declared their
rebelled.
independence. Yeah.
Yes, but yeah, finally, the lone survivor standing. Actually, if you see it, is the Hoysalas, Veeraballala
Yeah.
the third.
That's
That
right.
now we come at a critical juncture. Um, the last great ruler of Hoysala, Veeraballala the third, is now the only figure who is standing, and he's there biding his time. And I think to help his cause, what you said about the Madurai Sultanate, right? Tughlaqs have a division in between them, where you have this. Who was he? Ghiyasuddin or
Yeah, Ghiyasuddin Tamgani, something like.
someone, right? Anyway, so I think he was the cousin, I think, of Tughlaq.
We are talking about the Kampali incident, right?
No, I'm more talking about the Madurai Sultanate.
I don't think so. Madurai Sultanate was related to Tughlaqs. They were probably senior generals who were left there in the Pandya lands because the Pandyan territory was gone.
Right.
And because it was so far off, they just rebelled.
Yes. Yes.
I think that explained why Alauddin Khilji never tried to control South, because
Yes.
if these guys couldn't rely on their own, like maybe some of them might even have been their own Ghulam soldiers. So if they couldn't control their own Ghulam soldiers, it was
Right.
highly unlikely they were able to control the normal population of that land.
Yes. Yes.
So the Madurai Sultanate kind of is a state that develops through the military garrison or the military governors who are placed in the Pandya lands. And this is a state that kind of starts having a fight with the Hoysalas, because the Hoysalas understand, or rather Veeraballala understands very quickly, that this is an isolated state without any kind of support, and it is something we can crush, because they
Yes.
hadn't really built up any kind of local alliances, and in general they seem to have been cruel even by the
Yes.
regular standards, because
Yes.
you have even Ibn Battuta, who was there, he calls them as extremely cruel for the sake of being cruel.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
some of the graphic description he gives is pretty chilling.
Right.
So yeah.
I think yes. I think it was 50 years or 58 years that Madurai Sultanate actually rules. Right. The interesting thing though is that though this the division happens somewhere in 13
I think it would be around 1335, 1336 only.
35 or 36 1335.
1330s mainly.
Yeah,
Because
mainly in early 1330s, or right.
Yeah.
Mid 1330s. So though it happens, if you notice, Veeraballala does not immediately take advantage of the division. He's in a way, he was waiting for the way it is documented, is the golden moment, the perfect moment, because he understood that if he acted on the south, on the supposed sultanate down south that had raised the banner against the Tughlaqs, right? If he attacked too early, as soon as they raised their own banners, there was a chance that he would be sandwiched between both of up north and both the Madurai Sultanate, right? Because there's always the possibility that both of these, the factions, the Tughlaq factions, opposing factions, would unite against a Hindu kingdom in the name of larger cause of Islam, right? He was astute to finally realize that, and Veera Bhallala does not act for almost, I think, 7 years. He establishes himself, his base strongly in Tiruvannamalai, and if you realize, Kampali was actually a very strategic fort, a point, which actually had fallen to the Islamic forces. So Veera Bhallala establishes another fort down the Tungabhadra, across the banks, on the other side, Anugundi.
That's right. And he gives it a name as Hosapattana.
Yeah, you're right. I was missing that thing. It didn't strike my name, but yeah, it's amazing to have a co-host who can comprehend you right away. So, but yeah, so he kind of had all along a strategy that he was following to do, correct the wrongs that he did, right, knowingly, willingly or unwillingly, in the past, right? This is where I talk about, I really love the character of Bhallala, where if you look at his arc, it's an arc of redemption, that man, right? Because not only he creates the Ranugundi strategic point across the ford of Tungabhadra, but also he lays the foundation stone in 1336 for Vijayanagara.
Yep.
And not many people, so most people used to be confused. Here we have a narrative that says Vijayanagara was founded in 1336 by Harihara Bukka.
Yep.
And then, but it is actually in 1342 or 3 where Harihara is actually being coronated.
Yep.
Right? Or because 1342 in the Battle of Kannanur is where Veera Bhallala III dies.
Yes.
Right? And it is only after that death of him is when Harihara, and Bukka and all the 5 brothers actually come to power.
Yes.
Right? So how is it that, the empire is formed? That was a question, Lord. But here is the thing, right? That Vijayanagara was founded in 1336, right? That is correct. But it was founded by Veera Bhallala, not Harihara and Bukka.
Yes.
Because the foundation stone was laid then, right? If you see, even, if you break down the word Vijayanagara, it's actually Bijanagara. Bija was the name he founded it after the name of his son, Veera Bhallala III.
Okay. Yep.
So there is that strong.
You're muted.
Yeah, so there is a strong evidence for that too. That the stone was actually laid then, but of course the real city was, of course, built up by the Sangamas.
Yes. So I think the Sangamas, at least initially, they called themselves as the Mahasemantas.
Right.
They called themselves Mahamandalikas or Mahasamantas.
Mahamandaleshwaras, yes.
Mahamandaleshwara, which is basically signifies that they were serving a greater king.
Right.
So, and only after the death of Veera Ballala, does Harihara coronate himself?
Yes.
And what is interesting is, one, as I think we discussed before as well, that Veera Ballala's wife attends the coronation as a chief guest, if you want to call it, in more
Yes.
modern
Yes.
terms.
Yes.
And the second thing is
His
the
smaller wife, the Alupan queen.
Alupan queen. Yes,
Alupan queen. Yes. This
yes,
is the Alupa dynasty in itself for the listeners. If we could do a just series of episodes on that too. But
yes.
yeah, but it was a very her being there, like you said, rightly said, along with the I think Sringeri Pita heads. I think the head was also there. Please continue.
That's yes. So, and also, what you need to say is the senior ministers of Harihara, at least initially, they were all ex Hoysala minister officers or Mahamandaleshwaras or Nayak. At that time, the term Nayaka wasn't in vogue, so you would probably call them as Mahamandaleshwara or Samantas of Hoysalas, because we know that Harihara's daughter married Balapadanta Nayaka, who was the nephew of Veera Ballada. So
Yes,
the Vijayanagara Empire and the Hoysala Empire were
tied at
connected,
hip.
tied at hip.
Yes,
So a lot of the Hoysala loyalists, after the death of Veera Ballada, joined Hoysala Empire,
yes,
especially after the death of his son,
right.
both of whom were died fighting the Madurai Sultanate, because Veera Ballala gets defeated in the Battle of Kannanur, and then he is supposedly flayed alive
Yes, and
uh,
hung up. Yes,
and hung up, and then his son apparently suffers the same fate against the
yes,
Madurai
yes,
Sultanate.
yes. And for the listeners, if in the blood of last Hoysala, right, like Abhijeeth had said, um, Veeraballala III gets defeated in Battle of Kannanur by the Madurai Sultanate forces. But here's the point: here's the kicker. He snatches defeat from the jaws of victory. It is purely through a slight lapse, I would say, complacency, that on the field after they have won, they don't watch their backs properly, and Veeraballala actually gets caught by a, a significantly large contingent of the Madurai Sultanate cavalry. Yeah, Abhijeeth.
Yes. So again, because we don't really have any kind of records,
Yes,
which is very frustrating, because we really don't know how these battles were fought.
yes,
So, which means that from what we understand, Veeraballala was on the verge of victory, and then he gets defeated. We don't know how he gets defeated or why he gets defeated. He gets defeated and captured. Possibly it would have been the other way around, wherein he gets captured and his army flees.
yes,
Because, as I mentioned earlier, most of these kings didn't really have a very large standing army, which means
right.
that if the king is defeated and captured, most of the conscripts would just run. I
Yes,
mean,
yeah.
as much as they loved the king, well, many of them probably didn't.
It's
But
panic. It's a once panic
it's a
sets in
panic, yeah.
route. Yes,
Yeah, so it was a rout, and then the king
yes,
was captured, and then he was flayed alive.
right.
Uh, so this death of Veera Ballala and the Hoysala kind of allows the Vijayanagara to come into power. And if we see, Vijayanagara kind of occupies the same areas that Hoysalas had occupied. And in fact, that transition from Hoysalas to Vijayanagara is pretty seamless. And that kind of makes you wonder if the whole Vijayanagara was already in some capacity, the rulers of Vijayanagara were already in some capacity
Yes,
associated with the Hoysala dynasty, because otherwise, a lot of these kingdoms, the subordinate kingdoms, right? I mean, not just the Alupas, even the Changalvas, the Kongalvas, these people who were there, who were ruling there, we don't hear a lot of information about all these wars that happens
yes,
against between them and Vijayanagara. It almost seems like the entire ex-Hoysala domain kind of goes lockstep and barrel towards the Vijayanagara, and that wouldn't
yes.
happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I have to point out again to listeners, I've spoken about this in the past episodes of the Foundation series. The transfer of power from Hoysalas to the Sangamas was bloodless. Not a single drop of blood was shed. And this is something that is usually unheard of. Even in the Indian medieval, pre-medieval history too, it's
Yes.
usually unheard of. There is some amount of violence always, even within dynasty to dynasty itself. There is violence. If you look within
It's,
Vijayanagara
it's, it's,
dynasty,
it's pretty normal actually. Like,
yes,
I can give an example.
you're right.
So after the Chalukyas of Badami, when they are replaced by the Rashtrakutas, if you see a lot of the subordinate kings of the Chalukyas of Badami, especially the Gangas, they actually they fight against the Rashtrakutas. Even the Alupas, they don't really accept the Rashtrakuta overlordship immediately. Rather, they fight against the Rashtrakutas for a generation or so. The Alupas surrender earlier. The Gangas fight for a couple of generations before some kind of marriage alliance kind of stabilizes the situation. That was pretty common because while we think them as feudatories in the British or the English terms, or sorry, rather the Western terms, these were not feudatories. They were independent kings who had accepted the overlordship of other king, which these kings had their own domain of power, they had their own vassals, they had their own military, which means that some random king couldn't just come and command their loyalty. You have to show them a force, do that only through a show of force or some kind of ties that they already understood. So, if this transfer of power happens bloodlessly, that clearly means that the Sangamas were someone the most of the rulers of the sub kingdoms of the empire were already aware of or were comfortable of accepting as their overlord. And that could be only possible if the Sangamas were somehow related to the previous dynasty, because
Right.
otherwise, most of these dynasties would have aspired to become independent or at least try to assert their domination, which we don't see a lot. We don't see
Yes.
in the establishment of the Vijayanagara Empire.
Right. When I was for the foundation series, I'd struggled a lot to, understand all of these because there's a lot of narratives. I had to wade through a lot of that to able to come to the same conclusion that we are discussing now. The most plausible explanation, which is very logical if you think about it, and it follows a lot of these patterns which the predecessor kingdoms had followed. In terms of power transfer happening even within the kingdoms themselves, right, where the sovereign's right hand vassal slowly accumulates influence. He waits for a moment. He waits for the right time to take over, right? Either through overt or covert usurpation,
That's
right? But in this case, so I had to like wait through. So that was the only thing. But in this case, there is no usurpation. It was such a peaceful and a gradual transfer of power, and which completely shatters the narratives that were even today, which are alive, which say that Harihara and Bukka were actually these revenue officers with the Kampilis or the Yadavas, and they were actually, after Kampili fell, they converted to Islam, and the Islamic sultanates, they sent them down basically to basically go and establish kind of some force, a kingdom, and then that's how, and you know the story, right?
Yep.
Right, Harihara and Bukkar then basically uh, reconverted back to Hinduism and all of that. That I was so surprised to see how deeply entrenched that narrative was, not only in the olden descriptions and narrations, but also it still survives even now. You talk to so many Indians and Hindus even right now about that. They say, yes, this is how it happened, right? What is it? Why do you think that is? And what do you
I
have?
think, I don't know why it is, because that's how it has been described. The problem is everybody keeps talking about Harihara and Bukka, Harihara and Bukka,
Right.
and we realize that there were two brothers, there were five brothers. So when we say that Harihara and Bukka converted to this thing, you need to say that did all five convert, because there were five of them.
Yes. Not
While
many people know that. Five brothers.
Yes,
Yes.
so that is
Yes.
important, because
Yes.
did all five convert? Did only two convert? What happened to
Yes.
the rest of the three? What were the rest of the three doing? How did they come back? So the moment you have three more brothers into the picture, right, it complicates the story.
The whole narrative actually collapses if you think about it.
Yeah, because
Yes.
there are only because all the narration sits with the two brothers. The moment you
Right.
have add three more extra brothers who did rule, we know that they ruled. So we know that they were pretty. They had their own portions of the empire, and they lose power. Only their descendants lose power only during the time of the Haryara II, who comes and dispossesses his cousins from power and then establishes his own sons to that domains.
All
So
right.
till then they were ruling as almost like independent, semi-independent kings, but they were ruling. So
Right.
and it is probably during the Harihara the second's time that this information that these places were being ruled by almost semi-independent kings is kind of brought down a little bit. So which is why we kind of lost that information saying that there weren't two brothers, there were actually five brothers.
Yes.
So which is where this entire story gets confusing, because you then have Bukka's son Kampanna is actually named after his elder brother Kampanna. So there
Right.
was a Kampanna. So it was basically Harihara, Bukka, Kampanna, Marappa,
Yes.
and Muddappa. So there are
Right.
these five brothers. So the rest of the three brothers, which is Kampanna, Muddappa, and Marappa, are pretty much lost in history. I mean, they're not lost. It's just that we don't know. And the moment you include them into the story, it kind of becomes complicated, because did only two of them get converted, and Bukka wasn't the second brother. He was
Right.
probably the third or the fourth brother.
And not only that, okay, let's run with that. Let's think Harihara and Bukka were converted the force of sword to Islam. They came
Yep.
back. And here you have this narrative which says Vidyaranya converted both of them back to Hinduism, right? Or Sanatana Dharma. And you have this, stalwart of a saint, right? Like Vidyaranya, who would do this reconversion ceremony, which was even during those times unthinkable, right? This was not a system that was there then, right? It's even today, right? Because it is a bit really I'm just purely going back and thinking from their shoes in those times, not from our modern lenses. It's so easy to think that reconversions would happen so easily back to the original faith, because most of us today are looking it from our own secular and progressive lenses, right? But instead, back then, I would assume that once you have converted and you have carried out some acts to signify you have converted to Islam, at that time it would have been unthinkable for them to be allowed back into the fold of Sanatana Dharma. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yes. As I said, right? If we keep off the religious aspect of
Yes.
it, like I'm not even going to discuss the religious part,
Right.
whether they converted, not converted, and
Right.
everything. I'm just going to talk it from a pure political point of view.
Right.
The issue here is these guys are foreigners who are trying to establish themselves in a okay, let me put it this way. These are probably chess pieces in a chessboard that is already
Right.
filled with enough chess pieces who all think they are kings.
Right.
For them to be able to just come in and then command the loyalty of all of these people is very difficult. It's
far-fetched.
I have not. Yeah, it's far fetched, because
Yes.
why would a king, like say the ruler of Alupa dynasty, why would he by the way, a lot of people don't realize the king of Alupa was actually the son of Veeraballala.
Right.
So he had a greater claim to the throne
Yes.
than the Sangama dynasty.
Yes.
Why would he accept that? He had
Yes.
no reason. Conversion, no conversion, it doesn't matter, right?
Absolutely.
He had no reason to accept that. Similarly, a lot of those dynasties, right, as I mentioned, the Pandyas, or not the Pandyas, but there were these smaller kingdoms, the Silharas. Chilharas were probably gone by then, but there were a lot of these smaller kingdoms, especially in coastal Karnataka, like the kingdoms of Jarsopa, Saluvas, and everything, right? They absolutely had no reason to accept some random guy or
dudes coming in and then being
saying that,
hosted on
hey,
the
you know
throne.
what, we got our identity card, we are freshly minted. This thing, like, let's accept us as our kings.
Yes.
It wouldn't happen. I mean, why would they?
Somebody
Like,
without no legacy, and all these dynasties, Alupan and, all these other dynasties or, these lineages you just mentioned, they had some illustrious lineages going back centuries.
Alupas were pretty.
Pretty,
They
yeah,
ruled
yeah.
for a very long time because
Yeah.
Alupas were under the Chalukyas of Badami, then the then the
Yes.
Rashtrakutas, then the Chalukyas of Kalyana, then the Hoysalas, and then at the beginning of Vijayanagara. So they
1500
served.
years they had it. Their
Yes.
history is 1500, which is
Yeah, and then
massive.
they were pretty powerful in their own region, which means that
Yes.
it would
Yeah.
be like, all I'm saying is these kind of power transfer
Players.
wouldn't happen without wars,
Absolutely.
and we haven't heard of any of those wars.
Yes.
So which means that why did these guys accept it?
Yes.
Only explanation could be they accepted it is because the Sangama family were already related to the Hoysalas.
Yes. And
Any
they
other
were like,
explanation
yes.
kind of makes it kind of goes into a weird rabbit hole,
Yes.
wherein you'll have to then figure out, okay, why did this guy accept it? Okay, maybe they accepted because these guys were extremely powerful
Yes.
militarily. But we know they weren't extremely powerful
They were.
militarily because they were defeated regularly by the Bahmanis. So at least initially there were defeats by the Bahmanis. Similarly, what else could be the reason? Because everything you go through, I mean, you don't hear of any of these fights, there is no rebellions. It takes quite a long time before the actual rebellions start. So why? What made these guys so capable? Like,
Yes. So yeah, I think we come there to a point where we can safely say that most of these theories or these narratives about all of these being revenue officers from Kampili, they being converted, they converted back again, and I think most of them are just, they were stories that were made to fill holes. Because if you think about it now, thanks to a lot of the research and information, archaeological epigraphs and all of that have been resurfaced over the last 100 200 years, now I think we're in a much better shape, to much better position to say that most of that was actually made up. It was very convenient to make up, either to fill in the blanks, or it might be for some other religious or political reasons where it was created by some vested interest or forces to create some fault lines and things like that. Or it is very easy um, to also create those stories with the idea that, hey, what is the best way to tarnish the legacy of Vijayanagara? Hit it at the root, create doubt at the foundation itself, and the founders themselves.
yeah,
Right? Yeah.
but ultimately, I would say it doesn't matter who they were.
Yes. Yeah.
Because what they did was matters. Like, I
Yes.
think who they were just accident of birth.
Yes.
What they did was probably more important, and they established an empire that stood for 200 years
Right.
successfully. And then, even when it was fading, it still ensured that the baton passed on to the Marathas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the thing, right? I think when trying to sum up this episode, or to sum up the legacy of Vijayanagara, is that they were somehow Vijayanagara was standing until it was able to safely transition or transfer the responsibility of protecting Sanatana Dharma to hands of Marathas and Shivaji Maharaj. Because not many people kind of think, I'm sure you would agree, that even now I talk to people, they say, at Battle of Talikota, Vijayanagara Empire completely got destroyed. It ended there. They think the end of Vijayanagara is 1565.
Yeah.
But it survived almost another 80 years.
Yes, and even after the defeat of Talikota, the actual territory that exchanged hands was pretty small.
Right.
We know that because at least central Karnataka, where the Ikkeri Nayakas were there, they still very depending on the ruler and depending on their mood, they consider themselves as the vassals of Vijayanagara. So, which means that they were the guys who were still there and they were preventing the invasions or this thing. So, central Karnataka was still pretty much under the rule of Vijayanagara. So, which means that only a few districts, maybe one or two districts at the of Vijayanagara was lost. So that's not a picture of a complete defeat. Complete defeat
Yes.
would be a destruction of an empire.
Yes.
If your most of your empire survives except for a few regions lost, that's a setback.
Yes. Sure. I mean, Hampi was sure it was destroyed, and I mean, when I say destroyed, it was severely damaged, I would say. Um, um, and Vijayanagara, sure, temporarily, like you said, it had some reverses in its territorial aspects, but its rest of the structure was pretty much intact. They moved down south. I think immediately they moved to Penukonda. Right. I think is it Tirumala Raya? He moves to Penukonda. Is what actually happens, and there I'm pretty sure that is for another episode.
Yep.
Even the whole Talikota is another episode. So finally, let's Abhijeeth, I'll give the floor to you. How would you sum up again Vijayanagara's legacy?
I think it was probably a light in the dark times of South India. So that is what
Beautiful.
is Vijayanagara's legacy. That it even if you take out all kind of religious aspect or anything
Yes.
out of it, it is just that it maintained the culture. So a lot of the times you have seen when there is a clash of civilizations, one of the civilization loses. So Vijayanagara, by just existing, ensured that the civilization was not lost, and so it's still there. So it passed on the baton to the Marathas. Till it passed on to the baton to the Marathas, this Vijayanagara kept ticking, and then it kept on holding on to the civilization. So they are like a link from the past, from our past to the future. So they were this empire that was held on to the legacy of the glorious legacy of the
Absolutely.
past, and then passed it on to the future.
So let me end with that. That's a good point that you bring. They were the light, in the dark. The light that actually led or, saved South India or India in that sense. Because when, I think this is an anecdote from the records that I was reading. When Harihara becomes the emperor or the king, even I think after that Bukka also, they style themselves as their original
Mahamud.
names and all of it. They don't style themselves as these kings who have come to do or emperors. They don't give glorious titles, right? They give simple titles like the one who has come to save the Vedas, the one who has come to keep the four varnas intact, the system intact.
Yep.
Right? So what is amazing is it shows that South India was, or Indian civilization as such was at such a critical juncture where everything that we know that we can call as our South Indian heritage or Indian Hindu heritage was at the risk of getting wiped out. Because there is enough records to show that. I think this is another legacy, is that even in spite of Sangamas, leading through the nascent stages of the kingdom, they made it a point that they put in place a system where they gave the responsibility of collecting all available knowledge and consolidating it such that it does not get destroyed. Because earlier, if you see, most of the knowledge used to be passed down verbally. Even the Vedas, Upanishads were passed down verbally, right? But this was at the risk because of the loss of human capital, lot of destruction, carnage that happened during all these invasions down south or up north, right? The first thing that the Sangama rulers do is they put in a system where everything is protected and written or rewritten. So you have these scholars who are being given charters, all these saints, rishis, and scholars are given a charter to say, go and repopulate a lot of these, right?
Yep.
So that is another amazing thing that I learned from the honorific titles that the Sangama rulers, the first beginning rulers of Vijayanagara themselves, they gave to themselves.
Yep.
Speaks volumes about the darkness that you were referring to, which you're, I think, 100% right. I think most of the people who have understood the importance of Vijayanagara, even the most of the even like Krishnaswamy Iyengar and Nilakanta Shastri, I think even Ramanaya, they all basically say the same thing. I think they disagree on a lot of things, but they agree on this one thing.
Yep.
I think yes. I think we can end this episode on the conclusion, on that beautiful conclusion. I hope the listeners have enjoyed this episode. Abhijeeth, it's such a pleasure talking to Abhijeeth. I don't even realize how fast the time passes. And
that's true.
It's amazing to talk to you about all of this in depth. It's nice to have someone to talk to in depth.
Same. Yeah.
And I loved the points that you made about the military systems, how it was imported from Mughals, the Ghulam system and everything. And that was extremely insightful. That puts into perspective so many things. And even for myself, it connects some of the dots about why is it that there was such a rapid incursions that had happened either into the north or into the south. What was it that actually was different? The way we were conducting war versus these foreign invaders who were coming into the subcontinent. So that was very insightful.
I think we can discuss that probably a little bit more, because there are a few things that we probably would want to clear about the cavalry and the evolution of cavalry in South India to some extent.
Yes.
But that I think
we should have a separate episode just on that. I would love to, because I know you spoke about the sculptures, the Hoysala sculptures, where they clearly show the evolution or the presence of cavalry, not just mere light cavalry, but much elegant, much powerful, evidences of cavalry in their sculptures on the temples or inside temples.
We should
do an episode on it again. Sure. So thank you so much for once again joining me on the show, Abhijeeth.
Thank you,
I'm sure I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope the listeners have enjoyed it, and the history buffs out there, you should check this out. Be patient, sit through it. I bet you will enjoy. You'll gain a lot of insights from this. Thank you so much, Abhijeeth.
Thank you, Narendra.